Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. As you most certainly know by now, I, of course, am James R.I. Cady, and I am just so grateful that y'all keep coming back, even though I can't imagine why. Regardless, tonight, or today, whenever you've taken the time to sit down and watch this, you return to listen to me talk at length about the 7th book in the Animorphs series, The Strangler. The Strangler, of course, is by Salman Rushdie and was published by Random House in March of 1897. I'm sorry, I got tired of intro jokes. Yes, The Strangler was written by K.A. Applegate and published in April of 1997 by Scholastic, because, obviously. It is the second book to feature warrior princess Rachel as the narrator, and more importantly, the second book to feature a narrator that has already narrated, which might not seem like a big deal, but if you watched my last Animorphs review, you know that the author took advantage of this new cycle as an excuse to just go nuts with science fiction staples. In light of that, I'm ready to just dive in. Spoiler warnings be damned. But seriously, if you're worried about that kind of stuff, then maybe, I don't know, take your less estranged parent out for a nice meal instead. Once again, despite our presence beyond the first narrative cycle, Rachel has to tell us how she doesn't have a last name and the world is out to kill her. Now, I would restate that I can't imagine why anybody would start reading anywhere other than The Invasion, but apparently some people do. Though I do appreciate that Rachel's first sentence is, "My name is Rachel, and you know the drill." But anyway, Rachel's father has brought her to the circus as part of their bi-weekly Please Continue to Love Me tour. Now Rachel, not being particularly interested in the circus because she is older than 6, dragged Cassie along to keep her company, while her sisters marveled at the rampant animal abuse and motorcycle abuse, acrobat abuse, clown. I don't really know that much about the politics behind the circus other than them being super shitty to animals. So obviously Rachel realizes exactly what I just said some 15 years before Twitter probably latched onto it, and decides she and Cassie need to put the hurt on one of the animal handlers who was just doing his job with the elephants. I mean, I'm not a monster, and even though there is a part of me that adores the antiquity of the classical circus in spite of the numerous legit ASPCA violations or whatever, I can at least sympathize. But the whole not alerting the Yeerks to your true nature thing? Yeah, no. So, Rachel sneaks her way inside of the elephant enclosure and proceeds to hide as literally the largest and least stealthy land animal in the world. Though I guess if there is a good place to hide an elephant, it's probably in a cage with a bunch of other elephants. Cassie, being kind of spineless, keeps watch. As it is dark, and let's be honest, where would an extra elephant even come from? The handler doesn't notice the additional and decidedly not Indian proboscis until it's too late. Rachel wraps her trunk around the man's waist and then thought speaks directly to him. God damn it. She claims she's from the International Elephant Police or some shit, and tells the guy not to be such a turd. It is stupid for so many reasons, and as is all too common with opening scenes in this series, has absolutely nothing to do with the plot. Honestly, sometimes I wonder why I even bother talking about them. So when the real story picks up in Chapter 3, it picks up with a not at all surprising lecture from Jake about how reckless this move was. Though, it's not as harsh as these lectures sometimes are where Rachel is concerned, but the fact that it's happening at all is way too harsh. Because the rest of the group didn't need to know. At all. Not really important. They're in the woods because Marco and Tobias have discovered something very interesting. But they don't feel like explaining it twice, so they make everyone wait so that Rachel can remind us what everybody looks like, and that Jake is their leader, and what an Andalite is, and that Marco's been acting a little bit different ever since the Predator for some reason. Anyway, once Axe shows up and the full posse is assembled, Bird Boy and the Wise Guy reveal that they have been covertly surveilling Commandant Chapman for a whole week, Tobias lending air support, and Marco presumably following him around in full gorilla morph just, to avoid suspicion. That's a joke. I mean, it's clear that that's a joke, right? Obviously, he just wore a big trench coat and a fedora. And they've determined that not only does the gigantic Yeerk pool that they visited back in the Invasion run under more than just the school, real shocker there, but that they have proof that there's an entrance in the Gap at the mall. Because, I mean, obviously. Another short Jake lecture later, as well as a nice nod to Jake's little Psychonaut adventure in The Capture, everyone agrees that an all-out attack on the Yeerk pool is just way too dangerous. But then Rachel throws the room a curveball when she asks Axe what he knows about the Kandrona, which is actually a decent amount. It simulates the Yeerk's home sun, its rays can be beamed from many miles away, its size varies depending on how many pools it has to support. If it were destroyed, the Yeerks would have to shuttle back and forth to the mothership, which would just be wildly impractical. It makes julienne fries. Ultimately, this leads to an only half-suicidal plan because they decide to sneak into the Yeerk pool in some inconspicuous morph so that maybe they can figure out where the Kandrona is, so they can destroy it. Because, I mean, it's safe to assume that everyone down there is constantly talking about how great that Kandrona in that place is, so should be easy peasy. Back at home, Rachel is greeted with the fun surprise that her father will be joining them for dinner. Rachel's mom and dad, Carlisle and Antigone, I want to say, irrespectively, have a civil relationship, if you know what I mean. So Rachel immediately knows that something is up. Antigone explains, stone-faced, that Pops has something he needs to explain to her and her sisters, Jordan and Sarah, I want to say, irrespectively. But he was supposed to tell them at the circus, but he forgot, and so now family dinner, yay! Try not to get too excited. It's Thai food. Wait, Thai food is fucking awesome. So, over Pad Thai, Dan, well, I fucked that up, explains that he got a new TV anchor job some 1,000 miles away, which might seem odd, but, I mean, he was a local TV anchor, apparently. And this leads to Rachel panicking, which is of course not a great look for her, so she swiftly retires to her bedroom, where minutes later, Papa Daddy comes up to talk to her and ask her if she'd like to move with him, and thank God, because of course that puts her mind at ease. He tries to sweeten the pot with the knowledge that Carla Belnikov teaches in the city to which he is moving, who is an implied Olympic-level gymnastics coach, in case the name didn't give it away, as well as the promise of rock climbing and hiking and several other things that we as readers have no reason to believe Rachel should give a shit about, and ultimately leaves her with something to think about. It's tough to see Rachel cry, or, you know, the print describing Rachel crying, you know what I mean. That night, our young heroine can't sleep for some reason, so she owls up, because apparently she also acquired an owl in the last book, and goes for a soothing night flight while she tries to process the events of the day, the comforting simplicity of dealing with something as mundane as divorce stuff in light of her life's recent insanity totally lost on her. Unsurprisingly, she finds herself drawn to Tobias's territory, which is absolutely probably not a euphemism. Am I a bad person? Anyway, after scaring the absolute crap out of Bird Boy, Rachel finds herself unable to be anything but coy. Tobias, for all his amazing senses, can't decipher that when Rachel says, "I'm worried about the year pool," what she's really saying is, "My daddy's abandoning me." And then when she posits, "Do you ever think about years from now?" what she's actually asking is if it would be okay if she retired from Animorphing. Now, Tobias is no dummy. I mean, the guy can see why kids love Cinnamon Toast Crunch, so he knows that something is up, but in the end, Rachel is still a teenage girl, so before he can figure that shit out, and let's face it, short of her explaining it verbatim, that wasn't gonna happen, because in the end, Tobias is still a teenage boy. She decides it's time to head home. Or rather, that's where Tobias tells her that she should go, but Rachel knows better than anybody that staring death in the face is the best therapy, so instead she goes to wrestle a bear. I'm paraphrasing. She actually went to the gardens to carefully acquire a sleeping grizzly bear, all while making silent observations about how a bear is beyond fear, beyond doubt, beyond pain. Rachel is a lot of things, but subtle, let's just say it's not in the top 10. The next day, as was the plan, the team arrives at the mall one member at a time so that they can just run into each other. Because, you know, the Yeerks have proved so clever and observant so far. I take that back. We all know that if they weren't taking these precautions, I'd be implying that they were stupid, if history is any indication. Before finally convening at the Gap. Using her mad shopping skills, Rachel selects a few items off the rack, clever enough to nonchalantly smuggle even someone as homely as Cassie into the second-to-last changing room. The entrance is in the last changing room, where they immediately set to morphing into the cockroaches from the last book. One after another, the rest of the team saunters into the same dressing room and follows suit, with Jake bringing up the rear, collecting everyone else's clothing, going and depositing it in one of the mall's lockers, and then coming back to cockroach up himself. There's gotta be a better way to say that. As I really should expect at this point, the team waits exactly 0 seconds before a controller enters and reveals the entrance behind the mirror. Wasting no time, they overtake stone step after stone step, before once again, axe notwithstanding, arriving in the Superdome of Suck itself, the Yeerk Pool. Not unlike they would in an actual sports stadium, they notice the faint scent of fried food over the cries of the innocent. And as a result, our heroes decide that the cafeteria is as good a place as any to just sit around and hope someone tells them where they should be looking. I mean, how would that conversation even go? Hey, Norm! You remember that time we installed the Candrona on the roof of that Howard Johnson's by the airport? Good times. Sadly, we'll never get to find out, because almost immediately after they set feet on the grody linoleum, a hungry taxon decides it's time for a snack, and it's always wondered what cockroaches taste like. Stuck to its long filament of a tongue and staring certain death in the esophagus, Rachel and the gang are sure that this is the end. And then, everything just stops.
Ah, Mr. K. You go on and make your jokes. I'll be seeing you soon enough.
Seriously. The taxon's digestion, that weird food smell, time itself, everything except for the Animorphs seems to be affected. Almost immediately, they find themselves forcibly ejected from their alien death trap and returned to their native forms. Now, confused and concerned, as rightly they should be, they cautiously venture back out into the Yeerk pool proper, taking in the sights and sounds, or lack thereof, of their newfound wonder world. Amongst the eerie tableau, prisoners are frozen in anguish, screaming silently as tears don't run down their cheeks. A frightened-looking woman kneels on the pier as a Yeerk sticks halfway out of her ear, and her Hork-Bajir captors reveal that, even torpid, they're still very intimidating. Surrounded by so much stationary horror, it's very easy for our friends to notice the only other mobile entity in the room, a scruffy, gangly-looking dweeb who looks like he'd probably be more at home in a tree. It's Tobias. You get that it's Tobias, right? I mean, back in human form. The team is overjoyed for like a second before they remember that literally everything they've ever known about the universe is currently under fire. Fortunately, it does not take long before the culprit reveals itself. The Ellimist, as Axe guesses. Now, what is the Ellimist, you ask? I have no fucking idea. And I've read the book. Anyway, the Ellimist appears first as a disembodied voice that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, and can refer to everyone in the room by name, though not their last name. Even the Ellimist doesn't know that. Next, the Ellimist takes a page out of the Omnipotent Being's playbook more than a decade before, and I cannot stress this enough, tvtropes.org was even a thing, and appears to the kids in a form that they can understand. So I'm assuming Morgan Freeman, but with Rachel's added narration of glowing blue skin, long white hair, pointy sculpted ears, and black holes for eyes. Is that racist? Anyway, as the Q Continuum cliches its way through even attempting to explain to these insects that he is, damn it, it is, fuck it, I'm just gonna eschew the pronouns. Rachel grows impatient because, obviously, but before she can make an example of herself by answering the timeless who would win in a fight between a grizzly bear and God question that nobody has ever asked, the Ellimist reveals that the Ellimist is here because the Animorphs must decide. Decide what? Oh, just the fate of the entire human race. Is that racist? Marco agrees with me that that's a pretty hefty order for the drive-thru, but the Ellimist pays him no mind. The Ellimist goes on to explain that the Ellimist and the Ellimist's buddies, the Ellimists, don't typically interfere in the foibles of lesser beings, but the Ellimist and the Ellimists will intercede when it becomes clear that a species is on the brink of total obliteration. Hence the Ellimist appearing now at this exact moment to warn our heroes that the humans absolutely will lose this fight. No word on how the Ellimist's meeting with the dodo went, but I would assume bad. Also, what? From there, the Ellimist takes everyone on a round-the-world tour to the bottom of the ocean, the Serengeti, New York City, the Amazon, Seoul, Rio de Janeiro, the Philippines, all while the Ellimist voice acts about how, Earth is just, super great. But the Ellimist can also see the future, and it's not as great. The Ellimist is not a poet. So, the Animorphs have a choice. Stay and fight and lose, or go and live out the rest of their existence training under an Olympics-level gymnastics coach with all the hiking and rock climbing and Thai food they can eat. But that can't be right. Sorry, or go and live out the rest of their existence on a new, decidedly less doomed planet with a small selection of other humans and Earth species that Rachel's dad has deemed worthy. Nailed it. Thoroughly bludgeoned with the metaphor stick, Rachel, and the rest of the team, I guess, who cares, breathes in the existential dread that probably a lot of people whose lives aren't as awesome as mine have to choke down every day, made all the more miasmatic by the Ellimist's delicate reminder that declining means going back to exactly where they were before the Ellimist didn't interfere. That's right. Tobias actually gets the better deal going back to living in the woods and eating rats, while his friends land right back in the crusty maw of a giant space centipede. Undeniably, this makes the decision not much of a decision at all. A favorite trick of the Ellimists, according to Axe, but seeing as how this is only book 7, they put it to a vote. A brief discussion about the nature of environmentalism later. Bet you can't guess who brought that one up. The team righteously tells the Ellimist to fuck right the hell off. And just like that, they're right back in the Taxon's crusty maw, left with the promise that the Ellimist will return and ask them again if they survive. If. Again, it's only book 7. Out of options, the Morphs do the only thing they can do. Turns out, a taxon's body is not meant to accommodate 5 teenagers, because as they demorph, the nasty maggot bursts open like an old pumpkin with 5 teenagers crammed into it. Masked only in the viscera, now covering them from head to toe, the kids charge for the drop shaft that Rachel conveniently noticed during their little visit with the Elemist. Now, being controllers, the controllers spring into action, doing everything they can to slow down these new slime monsters while simultaneously not noticing as these very clearly not Andalites, axe notwithstanding, transform into various wildlife. The bright side of all this is that Rachel gets a chance to try out that new grizzly morph, and it works. So well, in fact, that Rachel can't even really remember how they escaped through the mist of controller blood. A little too well, actually, as Jake has to straight up tell her to demorph so she'll stop trying to separate him from his intestines. Somehow, Rachel makes it home. Her words, not mine. And wakes the following morning just in time for Antigone to give her the whole, you know, if something's wrong, you can talk to me speech before rushing off to a busy day of lawyering. Rachel can't respond with anything but manic laughter, which I feel like she's earned at this point. Equally earned is the day off from school she decides to take to rest, recuperate, and work through some of her teenage angst. In broad strokes, it's hard enough to make the decision to move away from your family and friends, even if it's to be with someone that you love. The fact that Rachel is also about 17% responsible for saving the entire world makes the decision not really much of a decision at all, but also makes it about 100% more appealing. But when what is basically a god comes and tells you to your face that everything you're doing is pointless, don't worry, Rachel. It gets a lot easier when you die inside. So a bald eagle flies out of Rachel's window, and after a nice meditation in the sky, she meets up with the rest of the gang at the barn so that they can rub salt in the wounds that, admittedly, they're only barely aware of, or of which they're barely aware because grammar. They proceed to grill Rachel for skipping school like so much attentive parents. She, naturally, tells them to go fuck themselves. Jake, as the leader, tells Rachel to go fuck herself, because what kind of a team player does awesome shit like skipping school and tackling grizzly bears? Well, that actually kind of works, because Rachel almost immediately reveals that her current rebellion is, in fact, because her dad pulled an Elemist and asked her to bail on this whole popsicle stand. The gang asks her what she's gonna do about it, and well, she handles that about as well as she's handling doing about it, so not great. Marco changes his vote, should the Elemist ask again, to yes, because if Rachel's checked out, then what chance do they even have? This hangs the current vote. Jake and Tobias say stay, Marco and Cassie say go. Axe abstains, because why the fuck would he even care? This leaves the tie-breaking vote in the hands of... God damn, it's like kicking a blonde puppy at this point. Fortunately, nobody knows when the Elemist is gonna pop in again, so the poor thing's got all the time in the world to stew over it. So right about this time, the Elemist pops back in and is all, oh, you still hung on this? Guess I'll just show you what's up. Suddenly, the 5 of them and Axe, or as some might say, but not Rachel herself apparently, the 6 of them, stand in a mangy overgrown field beside their suddenly burned down school. And in a rare moment of insight, they realize almost immediately that they must be seeing the future. With God having checked out for the moment, they proceed to explore. In the school, they find a faculty and/or student body consisting only of a single skeleton. Unsatisfied with the public education of the future, they decide to head to the mall to see what sort of elite deals they can get on Mattel hoverboards and Nike mags. Sadly, the only sales they find are on giant space grubs because the whole place has just kind of been turned into a giant taxon hive, so that's cool. As the reality of total defeat sets in, so too does the reality that in this future, nobody would ever have any reason to assume that they are anything other than human controllers, except Axe, who insists that even after the Earth has been dominated, the Andalites couldn't possibly be, because reasons. So he morphs a human. Using their newfound, just existing camouflage, they board the crosstown monorail and, unsurprisingly, are not murdered. A half-hour drive, or minute-and-a-half train ride later, they find themselves in what was once described as downtown, but now could be better described as a single skyscraper surrounded mostly by architectural effigy. Humans and Hork-Bajir walk side by side here and there, but even they are much fewer and farther between than the denizens of a modern downtown. And in place of that arena, where Rachel just recently ruined that elephant trainer's evening, now can be found a great honkin' yerk pool that would make the Lincoln Memorial blush. Or still, the cages surrounding it are not filled with uncontrollably sad people crying for help. They're filled with uncontrollably sad people not crying for help, because they know there's none to be had. As the children look on, in abject horror, a busy businesswoman controller, or whatever, accidentally bumps into Rachel, and Rachel will have none of it. "Excuse me," she blurts, before immediately remembering that, oh right, darkest timeline. The controller demands to hear this little worm's designation, but before Rachel can assemble a random combination of words followed by numbers, Tobias interrupts by implying that Axe is Visser 3. Genius, especially considering that Axe is currently in human morph. Fortunately, Axe catches on pretty quickly and begins to demorph. As his stalk eyes appear, the woman shits a proverbial brick, especially because Visser 1 is the only Andalite controller, apparently, No word on whether or not the current Visser 3 got a promotion, or Skipper just decided that he sucked at his job and took his roommate. In any case, this seems to work as the woman slinks away and our heroes continue to reflect on how shady this whole thing seems. I mean, how long is the Elemist going to keep them here? What does the Elemist want them to see? What's up with the EGS Tower, that lone skyscraper that seems to be the only functional building left, looming over everything, including this giant Yeerk pool where the Yeerks absorb Kandrona rays? What game is the Elemist playing? A bug fighter lands not too far away, and Rachel feels compelled to approach. The others follow, and as the hatch opens, who should emerge but the very real Visser 3 and/or 1, as well as a blonde woman in her early 20s, who, upon seeing the Animorphs, banter about how they arrived exactly when they were expecting them. Because it's Rachel. Not the Rachel I've been talking about this whole time, but like future controller Rachel. Was that not clear? Future Rachel and maybe Skipper proceed to pontificate on exactly how she knew they would be there because she had already been here years ago, and how they obviously chose not to leave, and how that was the right choice, and how the Animorphs fought for a while but they were eventually defeated, and how the Elemist would return them to their own time any minute now, and how them knowing that is absolutely not suspicious and does not imply that the Elemist simulated this future as a possibility rather than an inevitability. And based on that, the Animorphs somehow figure out that maybe, just maybe, this future is not set in stone, regardless of their decision. I'm skimming quite a bit. There's this whole thing where they realize and then they explain, and then the futurists start to panic and they try to attack, but then the Animorphs point out that if they're harmed, then that could change the past, and then maybe all of this wouldn't happen. Something about barbecuing Tobias. But the point is, they figure out the Elemist scheme, and just as Grizzly Rachel slams into the good Visser, they're all back in Cassie's woods. Now, having seen what they've seen, but also having seen how what they've seen won't necessarily be what is seen, and worn out and sad and panicked, Rachel votes yay, and the Elemist proceeds to do exactly nothing. Seriously. The Elemist said that as soon as they reached a verdict, they would be transported to a new planet, and they aren't. The next day of school is challenging. Because, let's face it, who gives a shit about algebra or history or even sex ed when you've been tasked with literally deciding the fate of all life on your planet? Then again, I guess it's been the case since the beginning of the series, but now it just seems so much more real, you know? Plus, the Elemist's sudden radio silence adds a whole new layer of Black Mirror to this Twilight Zone. Nevertheless, history class ticks on. Miss Paloma drones on and on about how the Second World War might have been shorter and less bloody if the United States had gotten involved sooner, but we can never know for sure. To which Cassie posits, quite uncharacteristically, why not? Why can't we know for sure? I mean, weird space gods aside, I feel like living in the world till middle school age might have answered her question for her, but... Plus, she didn't even raise her hand. Miss Paloma somehow resists the urge to smack a bitch and instead explains to the class the very basic tenets of chaos theory. More specifically, what we all know as the butterfly effect, thanks to the groundbreaking Ashton Kutcher film. In short, even if we could go back and change the past, we would have no way of knowing how those changes might ripple out and affect the 5 decades since. Much like how a single butterfly flapping its wings in China could cause a tornado here in the United States. A single butterfly. A single butterfly. A single butterfly. A single butterfly. No, I'm not having a stroke, though Miss Paloma may have been. In any case, that's exactly what happens right before the bell rings. Rachel and Cassie confirm with one another that they didn't imagine it, and I fall asleep because what the hell does any of this have to do... Oh, I get it. The Elemist wants them to change the future. Fortunately, they come to the same conclusion almost as quickly, and everything starts to fall into place in the form of a dream Rachel has that night. She's back in the Yeerk pool. It sucks there. Cassie's voice reminds her that the Elemist showed them the drop shaft. Someone else's voice reminds her that the Kandrona is the center of the Yeerk's lives. My voice points out that the EGS Tower sure was prominently featured in that little space opera a few chapters ago. Come on, Rachel. You can do this. Rachel all but shouts Eureka as she shoots out of bed. Not only does she know where the Kandrona must be, but she also knows that she can't walk away when she still has a chance to win, as she explains to her father, who's absolutely not in the room, like a totally sane person. Immediately, she starts second-guessing herself, and she realizes she can't bring this to the group until she verifies her facts. And who better to accompany her on a flyby of a tall building than Miss Paloma? So a manic eagle startles a decidedly not morning bird, Tobias, and together they are suddenly at the barn with everyone else a few hours later. 3:47 a.m. specifically. Rachel explains that the Elemist very clearly wants to save the human race, but due to some corporate non-interference policy, can't directly intercede. The Elemist showed them the drop shaft, and the EGS Tower, and the future, even as the Elemist was offering a potential alternate future, which means that the future must be able to be changed. So, even though neither Tobias nor Rachel mentioned checking it out, and there's literally no rush, and in all likelihood it is a school night, and it is 3:47 a.m. specifically, the team immediately heads to the very tower in question. Outside, and presumably standing in confident straight line like so much Captain America Civil War, the gang, Tobias and Axe notwithstanding, assume battle morphs, in this case, bear, tiger, wolf, and gorilla. And like the badasses that 5/6 of them are, they board the elevator. As the door opens at the top floor, they're greeted by a trio of humans and a pair of Hork-Bajir who have absolutely no idea what they're in for. In less than half a page, the welcoming committee is either incapacitated or wisely running away, leaving as the only thing between our motley band and the Kandrona a steel door. Absolutely no idea in for what they are. Sorry, that was going to bug me. Fun fact, 800 pounds of Angry Bear is all it takes to turn a steel door into a steel area rug. And also, I was wrong before because there are a bunch of Hork-Bajir between the former steel door and the Kandrona. Now, because of a grizzly's limited eyesight, the following bloodbath is described in a series of nightmarish vignettes as they roll within 3 feet of Rachel's nose. You got Axe's tail removing arms left and right, Marco manually holding in his own guts, Jake and a Hork-Bajir rolling around in a passionate embrace like some freaky scene from a furry convention, you know, pretty boilerplate stuff. As Rachel loses more and more fur and patience, she accidentally blindly shoves one of their enemies through a window, thus allowing Tobias to join the fray, just in time for the remaining aliens to decide that they've had enough. Now, I'm not saying that Tobias turned the tides, but no, he definitely did not. As the controllers flee, the gorilla lets loose his giblets long enough to replace the door, and Cassie politely points out that Rachel is missing an entire appendage. So everyone demorphs, Axe and Tobias notwithstanding, to replace all their, missing bits. As Rachel gets her first good look at the surrounding carnage, everyone looks around to find that I was wrong again, and there's another fucking door between our motley band and the Kandrona. Sue me. The next room is empty, save for one Kandrona. Sorry, that was probably misleading. In any case, lacking any tools or bombs or anything, they use the only thing left at their disposal that could shove something the size of a car out of the 60th floor of a skyscraper. A full-grown bull elephant, which I probably didn't even need to say because duh. Just as everyone is standing around like morons asking out loud, did we change the future? Again, like totally sane human beings, Axe notwithstanding, who should Kramer the Elemist way back onto the scene, but the Elemist. The Elemist reminds them that everything changes the future, and then sort of passive-aggressively mentions that a new Kandrona is already on the way and it should arrive in about 3 weeks. But, a lot of Yerks can die in 3 weeks, so it's still a win. Minutes later, 6 birds of prey are seen flying away from the EGS tower. 2 days later, Rachel swings by Carlisle's place to help him finish up his packing and to say goodbye. He says what I imagine is the usual stuff in this situation about how he'll miss seeing her as much and how he's going to be back all the time, and if she ever changes her mind, of course she can still move out there with him and blah, blah, blah. You get the idea. He gets in a cab for the airport, and Rachel is all good, or whatever. So yeah, that's The Strangler, in an overlong but still shorter than actually reading the book nutshell. Just as the capture before it explored the whole becoming the enemy idea, The Strangler tackles another classic concept, that of the uber space deity, with a little bit of time travel thrown in for good measure. And as far as stories like that go, it was adequate. I didn't hate it. I mean, it sort of piles onto Rachel, and while a lot of things happen to her, I can't really say that she had much of an arc. She's basically the same Rachel at the end of the book as she was at the beginning, and the majority of the story hangs on exploring the newfound existence of an omnipresent entity, and that, well, let's just say even the Elemist isn't above my scrutiny. Oh shit, did I forget time travel?